This could be lecture 37 or 38 in on urbanism and digital narratives after COVID. This is the one pulling together a number of sources, maybe starting from Freud's Civilization and its Discontent, looking at the city in terms of these bricks, the dyad, what makes one happy? What would make one happy in creating the city as a civilization process? Freud talks in Civilization and its Discontents on just that. Why would we need civilization to make us happy when perhaps love is that thing that would make us happy? We do not need a civilization, read a city, read the internet if we have love. Central position. From there, it moves out into authority, into constructions of Eros and Thanatos, the libido drive, the death drive, or the completion drive. This is somewhat core in understanding a 6,000-year development of cities as an infrastructure of possible civilization. What is basically countering the kind of pessimistic message of civilization and its discontents in the creation of the city. How can you find happiness in the cities? Are these the dyads, the bricks that hold cities together? What is love? A notion of freedom counterpoised against the notion of aggressiveness in the city. We take this fairly aggressive primate, hominid, and stick it in a condensed place, or it finds the condensed place as an alternative. What are the forces within id, ego, superego? Mostly a study of superego to counteract the aggressivity within cities as opposed to out on the plains, hunting, gathering societies, agrarian societies. When Western theorists such as Marx and Freud examined primitive cultures somewhat, they brought up the notion, and this is their kind of attack on the development, 2,000-year-old development of Christian Europe as forming a mechanism, an algorithm toward growth and then toward imperial expansion. What is exploitative in civilization? How does the individual cope? What are prevailing features? So this lecture, maybe a couple, talks about the bricks, the dyads, the counterpoint within creating, arising out of Freud's kind of masterpiece, Civilization and its Discontents. Very lively written book. Typical of Freud, you say, oh, he's been disproved. They're fun reading, and it is kind of his shoot from the hip approach, out apart from empirical science. Highly theoretical, but therein is the fun. Let's go on. Jobs. Archetypes. Jung's collaborator, colleague, then rival, Carl Jung, who wanted to point that it was individuation, separating as individual and fitting in these archetypal, let's call them genetic sort of archetypes, just like a physical being. What is the interior landscape? So going beyond Freud's, his teacher's notion of id, ego, superego, civilization as a repressive form to be able to live in cities and so forth. Giddens, Bauman, Illouz on love, this notion that why do we need civilization? Why do we need a city if we have love? This is a dyad that is complete. You need no extra. You need work, you need to prepare for, if it's cisgender families, this, that, and the other. But we found this during COVID. Why would you need the civilization of a city if you have your work on Zoom, your chosen partner to go upstate or into the woods with? Why not resolve the countervailing and contrast between love and civilization, negating the aggressivity of Freud's typically male aggressive structures of beta males ganging up and overcoming the oppressive alpha male, thus forming a glue of history. Very male-centric, of course, and the theory's disproven. Who knows? Who cares? It's countervailing theories. Bauman, Illouz, Giddens, my preference for the risk culture people, but we're talking here about the juice that holds together a city. Love is the mortar, the mixture in the mortar with civilization, authority. I want to strip the so-called juiciness out of it, the eros, the confusion of eros, the immersion of eros, and get to the one of the more fascinating features of this, and perhaps why it is challenging even to talk about this in institutions of higher learning, fraught with so much vitriolic ingredients, is the notion that love and eros challenges authority. So the most interesting feature in any configuration of civilization is the countervailing experience of love, and therefore a challenge to authority. Covered by Giddens, Ulrich Beck, Liquid Modernity, wonderful book, Zygmunt Bauman, Scott Lash, all the others. What is the project? There's Zygmunt Bauman, a Polish intellect who moved and taught in England. Critical postmodernity. These people did not like to call themselves as postmoderns. They saw this in general as a little too nihilistic, glib. They were neo-moderns. What is the central projects? Against civilization and our cities, high carbon footprints, pollution, war, unstable pump and dump markets. What do we do as individuals, individuals? Bauman called it micro-modernity, pejoratively snowflake modernity. But what do we do to countervail the large risk things that civilization seems to have brought on? The postmodern Disneyfication, McDonaldization, Starbuckification. First time I heard that. Late modern, 1968 protest to U.S. Day popular culture. Democracy for all, in a sense, somewhat of a state socialism in the way that the state socialism of Soviet Union could never quite approach. Free modern, 1800s to World War II, modern industrial revolution, Fordism, very important. Make your workers capable of earning and paying for the exact product that they are making for the rest of the world. Sort of a bizarre form of modernist Kantian aspect. Rousseauian aspect that civilization's corrupt is in this book by Freud. Modernity is somehow contrasting to this gears and machinery that will chew up and grind to powder the human individual. Kant, the idea of Fordism and Kantianism in a strange way, will your maxim to which it shall become universal law, and the Adam Smith Anglo response of ascendancy. Digital, late modern, the 68 cultures, hipster culture, beatnik culture, hippie culture, counterculture, colorblind counterculture, but Black Panthers, women's movement was there to counteract Disneyfication, McDonaldization, and we arrive at this critical postmodern liquid modernity. Our space, lines are replaced with curves, the labyrinth is introduced, wildlife gardens, tarmac broken up, theatrical, amphitheaters encourage community participation. Want to get back into space again under post-modernity, but then during COVID we saw that break apart again. Objective, the social well-being of the whole community is addressed. Health and quality of life are seen as important. The greening of public space through post-hierarchical politics, flattening out, gig economy, digital hipsters, digital Maoists, sort of carving out sort of a doppelganger, working on code as a commodity, knowledge workers, as Berardi called them, cognitariats, the working knowledge poor, which we've perhaps is the first time we've seen in history. If we know further about the life of scribes in Egypt, scribes in Mesoamerica, we could have a different opinion. We have institutional liquid modernity finding its central position in the decentralized institution, the next sibling, the younger sibling to the city, the social internet network. Post-World War project period, liberation, individualized lifestyle, Leviton House, but formatted in a McDonald's way, symbolic cultural actualization. Here's what is that contrast with it, still as a shadow to the internet. Modernity institutional is the nation state and bureaucracy, which is still remains in the picture. Going further with Bauman, and again, they did not like to use the word postmodern, but this chart tends to call neo-modernism, micro-modernism, pejoratively snowflake modernism, as an ascendancy out of that play, chance, anarchy, exhaustion, silence process, happening, participation, to decreation. We see this also in the pursuit of love. Again, because it's controversial, when we talk about love as like the mortar of a city, why do we accept a civilization if it is not going to maximize our happiness? Therefore, the countervailing feeling to the regimentation could be love, therefore could be illusions of freedom, as in Freud's Civilization and its discontents. And why are we so unable to talk about it in its juicy form, immersive intimacy, or its form as agape, and one of the Freudian sort of examination is love thy neighbor as you would love yourself. What does this mean in civilization? What does this mean in a city? Further on, liquid love, Zygmunt Bauman talking about it in a way in his responses to the internet, to micro-modernity. How we find it is through searches today. Again, liquid love. Illou's book I read, Eva Illou's, on why love hurts, also taking this risk culture, micro-modernist view, not kind of like the glib, facile, postmodern nihilistic view, but why actually is it impossible? Kind of, I would say, after reading this book, a view of Freud's civilization and his discontent on what perceived gender kind of hegemony over another, identity hegemonies over the other, what in fact would allow for a type of symmetry. Very inconclusive book. What I gathered was maximizing over satisficing, this idea of the search of modernity, what would make me happy, as to arrival. My contentions of departure and arrival. Departure is in the maximization, satisficing kind of a vertical decision. This is here, this is now, I choose. Illouz draws, again, gender differences. Just, she skirts science of neuroendocrinology. We are multi-celled creatures, so we need our marching orders from our endocrine systems. What is the difference between nurture and nature? To me, not enough nature in this book. The nurturing of new semantic games of repositioning. Again, a Marxian idea, of post-Marxist idea of that civilization was corrupting, and it leads to forms of exploitation. Read violence, aggression, coercion. Again, love to her is the central modernist project. Out of this, in the city, condensation, downplay violence, aggression, maximize happiness, pleasure principle, beyond the pleasure principle, another great book, and Totem and Taboo, with this discussion of, again, Freud is simply shoot from the hip. Before science, is it outdated? It's an important bedrock to look back on. Many people who criticize these fundamental texts, Plato, Marx, Freud, to a degree Spinoza, and Hegel, Schopenhauer. Nietzsche is always a guy people quote, but never understood his non-linear sort of positions. This again covers a Marxian view that we are contorted by nurture. We are contorted by systems of exploitation. So how does this work out in terms of our ability to attain love? Is maybe the central project, counter to civilization as its only complement. We can live to read civilization as cities, and read this notion of love in the time of COVID as something where it is minimally affected by civilization as a coercive form. There's Illouz. Men can follow the imperative for autonomy more consistently for a longer period of their lives, and as so they result and can exert emotional domination. Somewhat misanthropic, I would characterize her. Again, a neo-Freudian view that love will always hurt because civilization is always corrupting, and by the way, it's run by men. Yes, no, power sharing, symmetry, an aim for symmetry. That's part of this discussion. Pulling the actual immersive libidinous juice from this. So the sensational aspect is always what people want to talk about first, how it impacts, how they can escape. Let's talk about the city as civilization, as coercive. An unflattering look. The only armament, as she states, as maybe Freud states too, in our kit bag against the coercive aspects of civilization is the construction of love. This is Bauman also, who does it in a more articulate manner, using the inner, quite an old gentleman who kind of speaks like a millennial toward what things, internet, things, telematic are. Very interesting. Normal chaos of love, liquid modernity, more quotes. Mick Jagger can't get no satisfaction. Too much is never enough. There you go. And here we go. Into Bauman's notion of risk, or his micro-modernity, the new project of modernity. Scott Lash, Giddens, Ulrich Beck, Bauman, a lot of these gentlemen are now deceased, but they took the kind of language games away, the cynical language games away from the postmoderns. Maybe Baudrillard would pull himself out away from the postmodern crew, which took on a kind of a bad taste toward the end of the 90s and certainly the aughts when we revisited the Iraq War II. The cynicism was seen as a luxury. Okay, so same-sex couples, where and how did they meet? Met through friends. Wow, how do you meet online through friends? Met online soars very high. So the heterosexual world is discovering the contact of these dyads. Let's just talk about cisgender for a bit as self-replicate. I know other sexual choices can self-replicate, but talking about June and Ward Cleaver, Levittown, 2.5 kids, two cars, whatever, pre-feminist obedience, which is strange out of context of Emma Goldman, the agrarian woman that Camille Paglia talks about. Meet in a bar or restaurant, we see these public spaces kind of sputter. Family, a lot of South Asian people, a lot of East Asian people still do this, but this is everyone's crack at the modernist project of love in a risk culture. That with Ulrich Beck, Giddens, Bauman, we talk about a risk culture as distributing the bad that civilization bought. Civilization, its central artifact, let me contend, is the city as a central art object, aesthetic object. That is its project. Just to make sense a little bit here, the next sibling is the internet as a civilizing feature, but this adds a totally different dynamic, to which the project Freud against civilization or countering civilization. Civilization is that feature in civilization and its discontents to counteract violence. How do we live together in a conceivably violent world? Perhaps male violence, natural male violence that has been natured through genetic selection. Many earlier societies depended upon the violence of its young men. And then how civilization is now later talks will talk about the city as an artifact and civilization as counterpoint. We're talking about love and civilization as a counterpoint. During COVID, we're talking about love and civilization, love and perhaps the city as countervalence. We see here where the internet is now a place where many, up to 70% of younger people meet online as it soars even higher. More of the graphs. Homosexual couple meets. That was formerly a condition of alterity, now inclusive, accepted to a large extent in urban environments, but where it was formerly even dangerous to meet this way in church, from coworkers through friends. The ascendancy online is part of a commodity-driven culture, but also part of an ascendancy. I love graphs, you can tell. Meeting again through friends, and the online soars after the year 2000. So how do we work out this liquid modernity, as Bauman called it? I contend micro-modernity, he also called it to a certain degree. These risk culture theorists were discussing this. These are practical people, very low in the francophone notion of language games, concept games, and so forth. Ulrich Beck is a German, and so is, I delightfully find in the new writings, relatively new, Bong-Kyo Han, a German-Korean theorist, post-Marxist theorist. No, I'm pronouncing that wrong. Moving further to this relevant thing, the rich get richer, not so progressive. Then we get into this liquid modernity, which is best if the city is the demonstration of civilization, and the next step of liquid modernity, micro-modernity, has an artifact, an aesthetic artifact. It would be the pocket smartphone. And one of the classic reactions in the past 10 years is this liquid modernist approach to finding, constructing, modernistly constructing love. It's left swipe, right. We see our old friend, both right swipe. This is the prisoner's dilemma that I pointed out in earlier lectures. So we see something that's supposed to be a sublime, almost heroic, Freud called it fatalistic, not nihilistic, but fatalistic approach. Nietzsche, who Freud based a lot of his ideas on, is constantly talking about the individual challenges against civilization and its infrastructure. Here we see one of the most banal features of this new liquid modernity, micro-modernity, finding dating apps. Swipe left, swipe right. When you both swipe right, it creates the harmony within the prisoner's dilemma. Again, we showed various aspects. Sapolsky talked about the iterated tit for tat. The forgiving tit for tat is this time-based thing that allows you to forgive what your interlocutor did in their life. What that chart, prisoner's dilemma chart, does somewhat imply is that we're still in a prison. You are compelled to act if the right swipes are both, but you are, as in the documentary we saw, A Social Dilemma, you are still confined to this new set of prison guards. Kafka, that's prison guard. The prison guard is only there for you and then goes away. Extremely prophetic story for them to, before the door, before the law, a short story within the trial by Kafka perhaps reduces us down to this feature of micro-modernity. With us, we have a doppelganger out there who's just set out to guard us. Adverse, both receive high points. Okay, more game theory, social penetration theory, online dating, blah, blah, blah. Conclusion on that was 1 in 10 American adults have used online dating. Growing reliance on online read not the luridness, not the juiciness, but the construction of their only modernist project, according to Luz, which is love against civilization, love against authority. You go to grade school, you emerge from your family, the civilization of your family. You are always attempting to find the unrequited love within the family. You leave that for institutions, high school, college, same abiding principle. Through your construction of aptitude and suspended gratification, you are also trying to find fulfillment. Your modernist project. We will continue